Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artist Index and sponsored by the great folks at Heavenly Spirits Imports. And this is also an auspicious episode because this is our first Fairhaven Local Cultural Council grant-funded podcast. We received the grant to produce 5 episodes with living Fairhaven artists. And you're probably wondering about the living part. Well, the other artists that we received the grant for as well are historic artists. Of course, they have to have someone to speak for them. But our guests can speak for themselves. And with that, I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and spell her name for the record.
Hello, my name is Margo Connolly-Mason, M-A-R-G-O, and my last name is long and hyphenated. It's C-O-N-N-O-L-L-Y-M-A-S-S-O-N.
Right. Are you related to, by marriage, obviously, to the Masons that used to be Mason's Office Supplies?
No, different Masons.
Peter Mason, I think it was, yeah.
No,
Okay.
They're all, on that side, it's all Rogers. Everybody is Roger Mason. Yep. So if anybody knows Roger Mason, that is, those are my in-laws. Yep.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So tell us, what do you do as an artist? A living artist in Fairhaven.
Living artist, which is a very important distinction. Yes. It's funny because I sort of have a hard time calling myself an artist. I didn't study art formally in school growing up. I was a biology major and have worked in environmental education for a long time and college admissions. But art has always been something that I've done, as a hobby and something that I've always liked having creative outlet for myself, no matter what I've been doing career-wise. But just in the past few years, I've been trying to take myself a little bit more seriously as an artist. And focus on that part of my life a bit more. So I mainly do oil painting, and then the past couple of years I've gotten into some collage work as well.
Now, did you receive a residency?
I did. I was just recently selected to be an artist in residence in the fall, so October to December of this coming fall at the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park, which is really, really exciting. So I'm just, I'm just happy for I'm proud of myself. I feel like this is something where I put myself out there, and I'm just really thankful to the park, and just really glad that New Bedford has something like this. I think that it's really special, and it's part of a nationwide program at the national parks, and for New Bedford to participate, I think is really impressive, and they get some amazing talent that come to that program.
Let me tell you, in the last few years, especially, New Bedford has really re-emerged in leaps and bounds. I always used to say the city that whose motto is "We Light the World" definitely kept a bushel over that lantern for a long time, and just got poor mouth, as they would say in some sections of the country, and didn't believe in themselves. And the dynamic vibe that's going on in the city, you could probably point back maybe to Richard Florida's erroneous article on the creative economy, but somehow I think that lit that spark up again, and so much has happened. I know I lived in Portugal for a year, and in a year's time I came back and I noticed so many changes. It was wow, things don't move this fast this often. What is the focus of your residency?
So I will, my goal is to create a children's book focused on downtown New Bedford and the waterfront, and different businesses that are downtown. I was inspired by, I was out to lunch or dinner one time with my son at Moby Dick restaurant. And there was this seagull that kept hopping up on people's tables and eating their French fries and roaming around. And the waitress said like, "Oh, that's Glenn, he's always here." And so that I just thought that was so funny, that he had a name and he was like this known, herring gull that was popping around. And so I just started thinking about it. This was last summer, that it would be just interesting to do a focus on the seagull named Glenn who, roams around downtown, and maybe he, steals snacks from kids at the Y during summer camp. And, he goes to the baker and gets a croissant, and something that really focuses on the diversity of opportunities that we have downtown, but sort of through the lens of this pesty seagull. So that's my vision. We'll see, how it comes together in the end. But
I mean, obviously Glenn has a bird's eye view of what's going on.
That's a good way.
Several years ago, almost 50 years ago, there was something. What was his name? Richard Bach, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It was like a huge. Well, they didn't know what that term meant back then, but it was viral. They made a movie. There was the book, and to have an animal, another resident of the planet, have a personality like that, especially a wild animal, is rather interesting. Sometimes you have to wonder, is Glenn more than Glenn?
Right. Well, I also just think it's, such a part of New Bedford too, and being by the water. And I like to go to yoga classes downtown. I used to go to yoga on Union all the time, and you'd be laying there and it's quiet, and then you'd hear the gulls outside, and I would always just kind of lie there and thinking like, wow, when 200 years ago, like people would be maybe lying in bed or something downtown, and they would hear the same sorts of sounds. And I just think that that's really a neat part of the history of the city. And we're always so connected to that waterfront, so to have a focus on that piece of it, I think that is something that you might not notice necessarily. Like you'll notice that there's seagulls around, but they're a big part of the surroundings.
And, I mean, I can hear them. I live in Fairhaven on Farmfield and Pleasant, and I can hear them sometimes down at the docks. I mean, we're surrounded on three sides here by water, and you can hear the halyards at the shipyard. On a windy day, just bang, 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 bang. And you could consider that annoying, if you wanted to. But if you just take that deep breath and stand there and listen to what's going on, it's amazing how many sounds. It's when you don't hear them that you actually start to pay attention more, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a great concept. And do you have a publisher yet, or?
No, I'm just in the very, very beginning stages. And I've been taking a few classes through RISD's School of Continuing Education the past couple of years. And I took a children's book illustration course. So I learned a lot through that, but I mean, there's a lot, it's a big task. So obviously not something I can get done within the 3 months of the residency. So my plan is to get, a lot of work done before I start my residency, and then be able to do, I plan to do collage to make the images. So to do a lot of that physical work while I'm at my residency, and then work with people at the park to, perhaps find a publisher or see what the next steps are. So it's definitely a larger scope of a project than I can complete within that time. But
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's also, I mean, you're in the sunlight, so to speak. I mean, you never know who's going to come visit the national park during the summer.
Right.
You can get some really good press from what you're doing.
Yep.
And I really think that the concept of Glenn, the seagull, is and stop and think about Glenn almost introducing himself to you.
Right.
I mean, talk about serendipity.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't something I had been thinking about before. It was just, happened to be in the right place at the right time, and he was in the right place at the right time. So.
Well, let's talk about, you said you went to RISD, and let's talk about being I hate that term, untrained artists, because that used to be an issue more so with trained artists than other untrained artists. I mean, the general population would think it was marvelous that, oh, you never went to school and you could learn to do that all by yourself. And you would get a lot of praises, and then the trained artists would be like, yeah, well, you have to have the academic background, and not everybody, but talking in generalizations. Does that? I remember when I was cooking, I had a friend of mine who was on the Olympic cooking team, culinary team, owned his own restaurant in Federal Hill, has his own cooking school in Tuscany. He's been on Chopped. I mean, he's all over the place. And we were talking about this idea of going to culinary school, and he was very agitated about it. He says, I didn't go to culinary school. He says, and I opened up a school in Tuscany, where I'm from. And if it really bothers you that you don't have the diploma, come over for a summer, I'll give you one. He said, but it's not where you've gone. It's not the traditional, not everyone has to go by the traditional mode of learning. Like he said, if you don't have the passion, you can have 10 diplomas, it's not going to make a big deal. So I know it's kind of on a personal level, but how do you feel about that? Because you said you really don't think you're a real artist. And I remember back when I used to do sales training and such, it's like, well, how do you first become a professional? And it was a trick question. When you first become a professional, when you say, I am a professional.
Yeah, that's true.
So is you is, or is you ain't, is, from the old Porgy and Bess, an artist?
Yeah, I think it's, I can see both sides of things. And I think that, I would consider myself mostly an untrained artist, although I've,
All right, again, see, you threw that
right.
word untrained again.
Right. But, but that's not totally true. And I think that, training comes from all sorts of different areas also. I think that, having a degree in biology and working in that field for a while has, given me different skills of observation and, knowledge of different things that I wouldn't have gotten, in art school. So I think that pulling in, training from other parts of your life is really important. But then again, when I've taken, art classes in the community or through through RISD, I've learned so much through those as well that I wasn't getting on my own. So I think that I've really sort of enjoyed having the combination of, trained and untrained and, sort of traditional knowledge in the arts. And then also, these untraditional things that I've learned sort of on my own as I'm going along.
You mentioned observation. In conversations and such, people be talking about what people notice and what people don't notice. And it's like, well, artists are trained observers. I mean, we, for example, like the human figure, we look at it differently from the average, let's use that word, untrained person. We're taught to see through the clothing, through the draping, through, to see the bone structure. And biologists are trained to, I think, also notice something that artists, in conjunction with what artists are also trained to see, is patterns and trends. You can always tell what's going to happen if you've studied your subject closely.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of crossover between science and art, and I like, the intersection between those two fields is really interesting to me.
Yeah, my brother works for Fish and Wildlife in coastal Maine. His primary job is to ferry ornithologists to the islands to do their research. And what amazes me is that what he's learned is that their research is on the leading edge. They can tell you what the weather patterns are going to be for the next year or the next several years just by studying those birds, by doing the tern census or the puffin census. So that the skill of observation is quite important. How did you get in? Well, I usually ask the trained artists, when were you first bitten? So when did it happen to you? When did you notice, like, this is pretty cool? And did you hit that consciousness where, well, I can't do that because it's not going to make any money and my parents are going to worry, so I'll go into biology because, you know, that's pretty cool, pretty steady.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that my grandmother, she used to paint a lot. And my dad is a talented artist, although he, you know, spent his whole career as a lawyer. But now that he's retired, he's really blossomed into a very great artist. And we share a studio at Hatch Street. And so I think, you know, that's always been, being creative and drawing and painting has always been part of our family. But always as kind of a side, you know, a side thing. But I always enjoyed it when I was younger too. My friend and I used to, you know, I'd go to her house when we were probably, you know, between 5 and 15 years old, and we would just sit and copy covers off of our books. You know, and that's how we'd spend an afternoon, would just be sitting there and drawing. And then I think when I was in high school, I took a painting class from Susan Cabral in Dartmouth.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Who was really wonderful, and I learned a ton from her. You know, but then in college, I kind of set art to the background and figured, you know, like you said, it's tough to make a career as an artist. And I think it's pretty, you know, it can be unpredictable. And I had other interests and talents. And so I decided, you know, to kind of go in a different direction, but keep art kind of always in the background. And then I had my first child 5 years ago. And after that, I had taken a break from working and started, you know, taking some RISD classes and just getting a little bit more into it. But I've also I lived in a few small towns in Alaska. And that was actually really great for boosting my confidence and making me kind of step out of my comfort zone a little bit and exposing myself a little bit more. There were nice small communities, and they would have art shows where, you know, anybody can enter, like a 10-year-old, you know, a 90-year-old, and, you know, your neighbor, your postman. So it was very welcoming and very supportive communities. And so I think I sold my first painting ever when I was in Kodiak, Alaska at a bookstore. And I just, you know, that sort of sparked me. I was like, oh, you know, like someone really likes it and they would, you know, pay money for it. So that was really nice, I think, to be in those small and super supportive places, to make me think like, oh yeah, I can do this, you know, this is something that people would like to see more of what I'm doing, or, you know, I like to see what other people are doing, even if they're not, you know, a quote unquote artist, but, you know, it's the chef, you know, from the local diner or something, and they also like to paint. So
yeah. Because I mean, there's an old Yiddish thing, you know, that's applied to anything. A painter paints, you know, a singer sings. So you are what you do. Do you remember the television show Northern Exposure? About the
a little bit, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Did that vibe exist? Like the same vibe of Sicily, I think it was called Sicily or Cecily, Alaska, where they were intellectual. I mean, everybody was an intellectual, regardless of training, education. It was like the most interesting thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, was that vibe present there in Alaska?
I guess I don't remember the show enough to say whether or not, but I loved living in Alaska. It's not somewhere I would have chosen to move, but my husband is in the Coast Guard, and so so he was stationed in Kodiak. I think we moved there in 2008. And at first I, you know, was thinking like, I don't like this place. It's rainy and, you know, there's bears everywhere. And
only 3 years, it's the Coast Guard.
But then I really got involved. I started volunteering at the Fish and Wildlife Service, and you know, started meeting people, and then I just fell in love with it. So we were there for a couple of years, then we lived in Juneau for 3 years. And yeah, I think in places like that, you're getting people from all over the world. You know, there's people from El Salvador, there's people from Anchorage, there's, you know, Coast Guard from, you know, Massachusetts. And it's a really interesting blend of, you know, ideologies and backgrounds and cultures. And everything is sort of multi-purpose. You know, you can have a Mexican restaurant that also sells sneakers, you know, or, you know, a TV repair shop that also has coffee. So it shows you, you know, that people are really multifaceted and, have a lot to offer.
That's great. Yeah, that's like well, my brother's duty stations were all East Coast, well, except for the very last one. But that's a long story. Furthest north I think he went up was to Seattle for surf school, because he was restationed to Bodega Bay,
Ah.
which is basically, he said, being stuffed into a bottle and flushed down the toilet every day. But yeah, and then again, too, all of these experiences as an artist, they do come into play, I think, subconsciously, or sometimes it's that background that it just presents itself. Let's talk about you as a Fairhaven artist, or a Fairhaven based artist. What is it about living in Fairhaven?
I think that, so I grew up in New Bedford, and then have lived in Fairhaven as an adult. And I think that it's, there's a ton of history in the town. Obviously, I just really like the natural environment that's in Fairhaven. And I like the connections that it has to the surrounding cities and towns. I live right on the bike path, which is really wonderful, for exploring and finding, I'll go out.
Coyotes.
Yes, they've been really, really busy recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice blend of, natural world, built world,
Right.
history, and then, things that are happening now.
Yeah. It's a great walk to go down the path from Pleasant all the way to the end of Skonnekonek, and then come back on the dike and walk on the dike as far as you can.
Yes.
And like just around Egypt Lane, I mean, to me, that's just like it's a whole other world over there.
It's
absolutely beautiful. Did you grow up in the West End of New Bedford?
Yes.
On Park Street?
Maple Street.
Okay, because there were Connolly's on Park as well. Christina, there was a whole clan there, because I lived on East Clinton for a while, so that's just one street over.
Okay. Really
between
close.
Park and Chancery. So has any of the Fairhaven vibe, which it really does exist. I mean, my daughter had worked in this town for years and always kept talking about it. It's odd that she bought a house in New Bedford, but you know how things work out. But it wasn't until I moved back to the States and came here, it's like, wow, it really is something very special about this place. What do you think it is?
Yeah, I think that Fairhaven has sort of that small town feel that I grew to really like when I was living in Alaska. And, you know who's running for office, the other parents at soccer practice. And I think that I like, running into people I know at the coffee shop or, at different events. And I feel like it has that small town feel, but then you're also, accessible to Providence. You can go to Boston and even just, going to New Bedford, go across the bridge and accessing different things. So I like that it's small, but also really connected to a larger community.
Yeah, I remember my sister-in-law came to visit us from Detroit, and she took a picture. She said, "This says it all about Fairhaven." She took a photograph of the street sign at Friendly and Pleasant. And then the Nook was another, So there is, I mean, just in a walk from the house, it's amazing, and you don't feel closed in or whatever. Your work has been primarily in collage. Let's go before the residency, or is that something new?
That's something pretty new. Mainly I'd worked in oils and doing a lot of kind of coastal based paintings like quahogs and mussels and fish and working waterfront gear like boots and gloves and grundens and then I was taking a class through RISD and we had to do, it was for an applied color class, and we had to do a collage with split complements, and I was struggling, just to do sort of this abstract thing. And so I decided to I think I did a cardinal, with the colors we needed to use, and that just sort of opened my eyes to something totally different. So then I started doing that a bit more. And so I'll take pages from old textbooks that I have from grad school and paint over the text and over scientific illustrations in there. So I can create my own colors, but then they also have this nice texture and pattern in the background with the text. And then we'll use that to then make an image. So I think last year I made myself do 12 different bird species. And then I made a calendar. And then this year I did 12 different botanical species and made a calendar out of that, and have been doing some prints, and then a few different projects for friends and family too with collage. And that's, yeah, something that's different than, oil painting. And it's pretty relaxing to me. I feel like sometimes when I'm painting, I get, just a little tense, or you're limiting your breathing, or, like focus on different things. Collage is just like, oh, snip, snip, well, I'll glue that, and if you make a mistake, you just put more over it, or, I'll use some pen and ink and different materials.
The boundaries, there are less boundaries, I guess, because you're going by immediacy. It's what you can find, because if you'll try to look for something specific, what happens. It's very, very rare that you're going to find it.
Right.
And collage has, I think, because finally Black artists, African-American artists are finally starting to get their recognition that's due to them. Collage is prevalent in that community, because it was readily available. Everybody could get magazines, newspapers, whatever, and some glue, and start to create. And it's I think now become much more, we were talking about the trained, untrained artists, and collage at one time was sort of like, it's collage, it's like, just another name for, what was the Mod Podge, or not applique. It was a rage during the 70s where people would seal it under some sort of a seal coat. It'll pop up after we're done. But and when you were speaking about using your biology books and such, I thought of something I haven't thought about in years, and that Salvador Dali had a series. Now, the guy was a genius to begin with, but he would look at the newspapers, and if you look at, just focus on the negative space, in other words, everywhere where there's no type, and you start looking, you can start to see patterns in the text, regardless of what it says.
Oh yeah.
And he did a series of football players, very much Leonardo da Vinci style, on these newspapers. They were just absolutely incredible.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, and they just fit in there, so much. How dimensional are your collages? I mean, they're pretty flat, or
they're pretty flat.
Decoupage, that's the word, decoupage.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, at this point they're pretty flat. Yeah, and I've done a couple that are bigger, but mostly, kind of 11 by 17, 8 by 10. But then I was getting the calendars printed this year at a printer out on the Cape, and the guy there said like, oh, this would be really cool, like on a really large scale. So that made me, I might try to push myself a little bit more to, expand my dimensions a little bit, still flat, but
right.
But
I mean, there's an African
American
artist, I think starts with a B. I just saw, she's getting rave reviews. She's a quilter, but she does these figurative scenes, from history in quilts, and they're huge.
Huh.
They're absolutely huge, and they're even bigger than there was one piece that she did. It probably covered 3 queen-size beds.
Oh,
that's
wow.
how big they are. So I'm almost wondering, with collage, how big can you go before you say to yourself, I should have never started this?
Well, then you could just chop it up and have some smaller
pieces to it. Yeah. The residency starts again when?
October.
Okay, so that's going to give you plenty of time to gear up, so to speak, for it.
Hopefully,
Other than rating your graduate texts and literature that comes in the mail, that's probably like a godsend to you. When you stop and think about it, like other people say it's junk, it's like, oh, I can use that.
Right.
Other than that, what are you constantly looking for? Maybe some of our listeners could help you out by Do you have friends collect boxes of stuff for you or envelopes full of stuff?
No, not at this point. I think that, at this point I don't like using things that already have color on them. I feel like it's important for me to create my own colors of what I'm going to be using. So, maybe that's something I'll do eventually is, scour magazines and different things. But at this point, I like having a black and white base. And I like having the starting material as something related to the finished product. So my friend lives in Chicago, and she loves reading about presidents and first ladies and historical fiction, or not historical fiction, but just reading about American history. And she wanted me to do a collage of for her, and so I went to Savers and bought a bunch of books that were biographies of past presidents, and so that was my starting material rather than like a random newspaper or something. So I think it's not that someone's going to be up super close reading and make sure like, does this relate to to what your final piece is. But I think that is something that I look for, is having that connection between that original material and what the final piece will be. So I think for my residency too, with Glenn, my thought is also to maybe collect menus from restaurants downtown, or different materials from those places that I want to feature as my starting materials.
I think that's a great idea too, because it's contemporary and people will want to see if it's my part of me in there somewhere. You had an appointment you said that's coming up that you have to get to?
I do. I have a meeting for work. I work at a school, and I have a
all right, and you have to get there. How much more time do you have left?
I probably have about maybe 5 more minutes. Is that okay?
All right, yeah. So we'll start to wrap this up. For some reason, doing it on the half hour at 10:30 when we started this instead of the 1 hour threw my mechanics and my brain off a bit. What would you like people to know about you?
I think that I love this area of the country. It's where I grew up, and I've lived away and didn't really picture myself coming back. If you had asked me when I was 17 if I'd be living here, as a 40-year-old, I would have said, there's no way. But having come back as an adult, I just have a greater appreciation of how special the area is, the natural environment, the built environment, and just the people that are here, and the history and, the modern things that are going on. And I think also having grown up here, in the 80s and 90s, and then coming back as an adult, I saw such a huge, like you were saying, like a growth and expansion throughout the whole city. There's so much going on, and lots of people working, to grow the city and opportunities that are here. So I just really, really appreciate that. And I'm really grateful to be able to be a part of that.
Was your husband restationed, by the way? Or he was restationed back to the East Coast?
Yes. So we've moved back and forth to Alaska twice. We've lived in Maine and South Carolina. And then
was he up in Southwest Harbor or
no, he was stationed actually for grad school. We both did grad school in Orono.
Okay.
And then he was stationed in Warwick, and then was able to get a posting out on the Cape in Bourne. So this is his last.
Yeah, my brother that was his first station there.
Okay.
He left. He was on the Sanibel, and he went to Southwest Harbor Group just when JFK Jr. Was killed.
Okay.
And they know everybody. It's the most amazing family I've ever seen in my life. The Coast Guard family. They know everybody. Knows everybody. My brother's name is Jim Fortier. So
okay.
Chief Jim Fortier. This has actually been wonderful. You just really never know what's going to happen with this. These podcasts are being digitized and archived in the Whaling Museum so that your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be able to hear your voice and listen to what was in your head, in your heart at this particular point in time in history. And it's kind of a wonderful opportunity for me, and it's a wonderful gift, I think, as well, to be able to be a part of this. Before you go, and I know you have to leave, what's the one thing that has been left unsaid?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like we covered a lot. I just, again, I'm really happy to be part of this community, and this is where my heart is. And, this is where I'm going to raise my kids. And, it's a nice, welcoming small community, but also has a lot of opportunities. And, and I'm looking forward. I'm also just really grateful also for the residency coming up. I think that really boosted my, my confidence in myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking forward to taking that next step with my artistic career.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to delay you any further. And with that in mind, Margo Connolly-Mason, thank you so very, very, very much. Much appreciated for spending the time that you could with us. And this is Ron Fortier wrapping up another episode of the Artist Index. And Margo was our first living Fairhaven artist that's been grant funded by the Fairhaven Local Cultural Council. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.